You are going to learn the secret sauce for becoming a great conversationalist. If you found this video randomly, this is part 2 in a 4-part series on how to have a great conversation with virtually anyone. In part 1, we talked about the top 3 do's and top 3 don'ts of conversations. I'll put a link to that video in the description below this one. Here in part 2, the secret to becoming an amazing conversationalist is to ask the other person questions. And I'm going to get really specific about the exact kind of questions you can ask. But first, why do we rely on questions instead of statements? Well, I will admit that sometimes people do have great conversations by making statements back and forth, but that tends to be the exception to the rule. It's difficult to learn that skill. It's also very dependent upon the personalities of the people involved, like they like to debate and have it back and forth. And it's certainly not going to help you if you struggle to have conversations in the first place. So if you want to maximize your chances of having great conversations consistently, use the trick that every podcaster, professional interviewer, therapist, and every excellent conversationalist that you already know knows. Ask questions. Sadly, based upon my experience as a communication professor and executive coach, I would say that fewer than 10% of people realize they're supposed to be asking questions in conversations. By putting the advice in this series into practice, you'll be easily a confident top 5% conversationalist. Now, quickly, there are 2 basic kinds of questions. There are closed-ended questions you can answer with a yes, a no, or a very brief 1 or 2-word answer. How old are you? 21. Where are you from? New York. Closed-ended questions can be a useful jumping off place, but they don't sustain a conversation. Once you get a little information flowing, ask open-ended questions based upon what you've just learned from them or you already know about them. Open-ended questions almost always start with words like how, what, and sometimes why. We talk about this in a book that I co-authored with Julian Mierville called Positive Communication for Leaders. Open-ended questions give the other person space to explore and add details to expand on their answers. Before every conversation, I recommend you have a few good questions in your metaphorical back pocket based around the 4 F's that we're going to talk about. And you don't need to ask a question for each F or even ask 4 questions. Sometimes all you need is 1 good question to get that conversation going. So view these 4 F's as tools in your conversational toolbox that you decide when to use. For the first F, you can ask about where the other person is from. And I'll give you some samples in a moment, but let's talk about some quick do's and don'ts around this first F. I'm not saying ask this question directly. In fact, it might be wise to avoid asking directly, where are you from? In certain situations. Some people can interpret this as if you are suggesting that they don't belong wherever you are. But I still think that this is a 100% legitimate question in many situations. I would say it's the most common question I get when I'm in a place where people gather. For example, if I'm at a conference somewhere, a vacation spot, a big event, if I'm on a Zoom call, people almost always ask me where I'm from. In situations like that, it's completely appropriate. But I can see from a certain point of view, if somebody asks me where I'm from and I'm already in my own grocery store, my own town, my own workplace, my own local church or school, it could seem like that question implies I don't belong there. So I recommend using your judgment around this first F in terms of how you word this and when you ask it. Let's look at some samples built around this first F. Where did you grow up? What's it like there? What was it like growing up there? What's it known for? Does it have any signature foods? What do people do for fun? How often do you get back to visit? How has it changed over the years? Now, again, you don't have to ask all of these questions. Sometimes 1 is all you need. And you can certainly use closed-ended questions as a jumping off place. But you'll notice that almost all of these questions are open-ended. And even one of these questions could get that other person talking for a long time. That's the magic of this approach. You become a great conversationalist simply by getting the other person talking. In terms of common ground for me, it doesn't matter where the other person's from. I almost always see some type of connection. Maybe I visited that place where they were from or raised. I may know some people from that area. Maybe I've read about it or heard about it. But even if I have 0 connections to it, I just ask follow-up questions to learn more. Oh, I've never been there. What's it like? These questions are clearly great for social situations, but what if you're in a work-related context? Almost all these questions can be work-related for a professional setting if you reword them just slightly. Instead of asking where the other person is from, you can ask about their organization or their team. What's it like to work there? What's it known for? How has the organization changed over the years? The second F stands for fun. You're going to ask questions about what they like to do when they're not working. Here are some samples. What do you do for fun? What are your hobbies? What do you do on the weekends? What do you do to relax and recharge? What TV shows or movies do you like? Do you have any favorite YouTube channels or podcasts? People love talking about that stuff. And since I'm looking for common ground in their answers, I'll likely follow up with anything that resonates with me. The way you respond should reflect your shared interests in whatever topics that you have in common. If they happen to mention that they do couples dancing with their spouse on the weekends, somewhere in that conversation, I would be sure to mention that I also do couples dancing with my wife. That demonstrates that we have similarities and people are drawn to similarities. Typically, I like to start conversations with one of the first two Fs, and maybe the conversation just sticks with that the whole time, and that's great. But once you've heard a little bit of detail from the other person, you can also move on to the third and the fourth F. The third F stands for fired up, and that's about the subjects that get the other person excited and energized. I'm talking about the positive version of fired up. I typically don't engage people in topics that get them negatively riled up. And my approach here is to listen to their answers about where they're from and what they do for fun. And I notice the subjects that get them most animated. And when I see them light up a little bit, I ask more questions about those topics. If they mention that one of the ways they spend time on the weekends is going to church and it seems to get them excited, I ask them, where do you go to church? If they start talking about how they love to ride horses, I ask them, how did you first get into that? Or where do you take lessons? The reason we take this approach is really simple. People love to talk about what they love. So when you're talking about subjects that interest the other person, the conversation gets really easy. But you'll notice that asking about what gets the other person fired up is not necessarily a question that you'd ask directly. I recommend you first notice the topics that energize them the most, and then ask more questions about that. Another way to do this is maybe look around their office or at the stickers on their phone or their computer and notice what you see. Ask questions about that. I have photos of my wife and my son on my desk at my university office, and people ask me all the time, oh, is that your wife? Is that your son? People display items they care about, and that fires them up, and they'll very likely want to talk about that. The fourth F stands for future plans. These questions usually fit best toward the end of a conversation when you sense that things are winding down. You can ask questions about their immediate or distant future. I might ask them what they're going to be doing next after this meeting with me or conversation with me, or later during that same day. If it's near the weekend, I might ask them, what are you up to over the weekend? If it's a long holiday weekend, I might ask, what kind of plans do you have for Thanksgiving or for 4th of July? You can also ask them about slightly more distant future plans. If you're coming up on an entire holiday season, for example, you could ask, what are your plans over the holidays? And since I teach college, I might ask them about their plans for spring break or over the summer. Asking about future plans also signals to them that the conversation is almost over. And you can sometimes use this to signal that you are wrapping it up. You might mention that you have a meeting to get to next, or simply talk about the rest of your day. That's a graceful way to signal that the end of the conversation is coming and begin to exit. Now, one question I often get about the 4 Fs is, what if I already know the person? These questions all sound as if they're for somebody I just met. Now, they might sound that way on the surface, but I have found through experience that the 4 Fs work equally well for someone I just met or someone I already know really well. You might just adjust your wording a little bit, of course, but the gist is exactly the same. I have frequently found myself asking people I already know about where they're from and what it was like growing up there and how has it changed over the years. I ask them about work and what the culture is like at their job. I ask them about what they've been doing lately for fun, what TV shows or podcasts they've been checking out. I ask them follow-up questions about the things that fire them up the most or their future plans. Just be sure it doesn't feel like you're working your way through some kind of script. Be yourself. Use your own words. The question I listed are just samples. The way you ask a question is 100% based upon the person, your relationship, the context, and the timing. Let's talk about some action steps. I suggest that you develop 3 or 4 go-to questions that you can ask virtually anyone. Have those questions in your metaphorical back pocket anytime you go out into the world. Make sure they're open-ended. You can base them around one of the 4 Fs if you'd like. And look for ways to start conversations with good questions. Get some practice, get some reps, as they say. You will almost immediately see the kinds of questions that work better for you than others in terms of generating conversations. When I've worked with clients like this and done role plays, they get noticeably better within just 5 minutes of practice. Now, be sure not to see any of these questions in the 4 F's as a goal. It's not a checklist to work your way through, in other words. Just ask one good question and see where that goes. See if that gets the ball rolling. And if it does, just stick with that. Don't feel the need to cover all 4 F's. As mentioned, this is part 2. In part 3, we're going to show you exactly how to keep the conversation flowing naturally once you get it rolling with one of the 4 F's. And of course, you can also take a look at my website if you'd like. There's a full page of free resources there, including a free class on the top 5 essential communication skills that all professionals should have. I'll put a link to that website in the expandable description below. Until next time, thanks, God bless, and I will see you soon.